Hello and welcome to TYT Community. I'm your host, Jeff, as you can see. And with me today is my esteemed co-host, Rhiannon Aveneen.
Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about a report that was released last year in September by the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service. And basically what this report does is that it examined individual income tax rates since 1945, and it really sought to establish what, if any, relationship exists between the tax rates and economic growth. Now, of course, you have Republicans out there that are saying, that are really pushing supply-side economics and saying that, obviously, in order to have economic growth and prosperity, that we need to cut top tax rates for the 1%, the 0.1%, and the 0.01%, which is not very many people. Okay, so before I toss it out to the panel, and actually I want to introduce my panel first. Today with me we have Brian, aka the Pirate Fish, joining us from Canada, and we have Sean Fitzgerald from New York. Anyway, going back to the study, like I said, the study was done in, the study was released in September of last year, and it basically went and showed the different tax rates through 1945. The top tax rate actually was at 90%, and that was the statutory rate. It was at 90% from the 1940s and the 1950s. Capital gains was at 25% in 1950 through 1960, and actually went up in 1970 to 35%, but now it's back down to 15%. And so what effect did that have on GDP growth? Well, real GDP growth averaged 4.2%, and real per capita GDP increased annually by 2.4%. Although in 1950. Now let's contrast that to what we're seeing now, with our top tax rate being now at 35%. Well, we're seeing average real GDP growth at 1.7% and real per capita GDP increasing annually by less than 1%. So we're kind of in the shithole when it comes to growth. And what have we been doing for the last 40 years? Well, we've been cutting taxes on the top 0.1%, 1%, and 0.01%. So I just want to open it up and see what everybody else has to say about what we're doing with our tax structure. I mean, what do you guys think? Rhea, let's start with you.
Well, I'll just throw it in there and remind everyone that taxes do not cause employers, no matter how wealthy they are or how well off they are, to hire workers they do not need. It is ridiculous for any employer to hire people that they do not need and just have them on staff, wasting money, wasting effort. Taxes do not cause employers to hire people any more than wage increases or employee benefits causes employers to fire people. Taxes, meanwhile, infrastructures like education and public services and public resources continue to suffer, while in most cases when taxes are cut for job creators, so to speak, they pocket the cash, they pocket the excess of money. So once again, it's just another way to distract people and trick them into believing that this is going to be somehow a benefit to them, when actually it's just another way of screwing them over and making things much worse for them.
Very good point. What about you, Sean? I mean, you got some thoughts on this, right?
I've never bought into the Republican line about tax rates being the key to economic growth, because it doesn't count the two other taxes that are prevalent in the economy. And to me, the second tax, and a more important tax, is the spending tax. Every dollar spent by the government is going to have to be paid for by the taxpayers anyway. So whether that's through true direct taxation or through borrowing, which is just delayed taxation, or even through the third way, which is printing money, which causes the inflation tax, just cutting tax rates isn't going to solve that problem. To me, it's a spending problem. It's not a tax rate problem. It's not that if we lower taxes, we can keep all this spending. It's really more about the spending. And I think that's the part that the Republican Party forgets, and that's why they're trying to bury the study, because it's inconvenient for them.
Well, I don't think they forget it. I think they're very well aware, and I think they want to try to hide that fact as much as possible.
That's exactly what they're doing, actually. This study was actually pulled from the website that had hosted it because of Republicans asking for it to be pulled. And there's some pretty funny reasons for them asking for it to be pulled. And they had said, the Republicans had said, more specifically, Mitch McConnell's spokesperson, along with other GOP senators, they had raised concerns about the methodology and other flaws. Well, in the report it says what other flaws, right? Some of the flaws, it included terms such as the Bush tax cuts and references to tax cuts for the rich. So they didn't really oppose any of the the numbers and stuff. They couldn't, because they couldn't disprove the numbers. But they still had the report retracted and taken off the website because of messaging. Bush tax cuts. Yank it. We can't have that getting out.
The Republicans are masters at twisting words and manipulating the English language in order to suit their purposes, by creating bills, by creating movements, names for things that sound good, like pro-life, for example, the right to life bills, family values. That's a very good one. That's a Republican favorite. They use the term "I believe in family values" to actually mean that I'm a homophobic bigot most of the time.
And you actually used a good one earlier when you said job creators.
Mm-hmm,
That's the mastery right there. Job creators. Small government, I guess, limited government. They love to use that when that's not actually their goal. Their goal is to grow government. Well, they grew government more under George W. Bush.
They use the term religious freedom to actually mean use my religion to oppress your freedom.
Right. And so...
Well, I just want to point out that I do believe that lower taxes are a good thing, like, in general. But you have to have the spending cuts to complement that. Like, you can't, like, Canada is a great example, and we have a Canadian correspondent who could speak to this. Canada was in the deficit crisis 20 to 30 years ago, and they've actually reduced their spending. They have increased taxes, I'm not going to deny that, but they reduced spending, and their economy is more sound and is stronger than ours. We cut tax rates, and we put all these loopholes which favor cronies in our tax code, and we dramatically increase spending, and we haven't seen the growth that accompanies it. Because all right, I'll let Ree go.
Sorry, I thought you were done. But yeah, of course, I think that we should raise the taxes for the rich and keep the middle class taxes as they are, or perhaps bring back some of their deductions that have been taken from them. I would be in favor of that. And but otherwise, I believe I agree with Sean that we should deal with spending, especially military and defense spending, considering that we spend more than, 26 other countries combined, and most of them are our allies. Mm-hmm. We could cut defense spending immensely, cut the defense contractors' oil subsidies, corporate welfare, get rid of, we need to get money out of politics. It all reigns back to that, because none of this is going to happen until we get that money out of the pockets of the politicians who are being bought by these corporations in order to, do their bidding. Everything goes back to that. Everything stems from that. We can't get a genuine government to actually govern in this country until they don't have the motivation of someone else in mind. They don't have the will of the people in mind. They don't have the benefit of the country in mind. They have their own greed and their own benefits in mind, and the benefits of those that are paying them.
Now, Sean, I actually want to go back to what you were talking about, the loopholes. Even back in 1945, they still had loopholes. According to that study, the top tax rate on the 0.01%. Now, I said it was at 90%, and that's the statutory rate. That's what they are supposed to pay. With loopholes and deductions and everything, the top tax rate was actually around 60%. Now, that's a little more than it's almost double what we have today for our statutory top tax rate. But of course, our real tax rate for the very wealthy is almost close. Sometimes it's 0%. They don't pay into anything at all and get a rebate.
It depends on the company, but on average, the richest Americans pay an average overall. The last statistic I saw is 16%, which is about half of the statutory 35%, which they should be paying.
And I just want to point out that the reason I brought up the loopholes in today's context, even though there were loopholes, obviously, back in the 40s and like throughout our history, except for before the income tax, today the tax code is like 60,000 pages. So like it dramatically, like, if the only the people who can hire 900 accountants like General Electric can play the tax code to their advantage. Like, that hurts small businesses. So there is a problem with the tax code, but I just wanted to point out that the tax rates aren't so much important as what the government is spending. And that's the overall problem with the Republican Party, is they don't care about spending. They pretend to care about spending, but they really don't.
They don't want to stop paying their defense contractors and giving, oil subsidies and corporate welfare. If you cut all that out and you got rid of the loopholes, that might do it.
And that would definitely go a long way to cutting the debt and deficit, which is what they say that they're concerned about, but they're not, which is obvious. But I want to go to one of the most important paragraphs in this entire study. And it says, quote, "There is not conclusive evidence, however, to substantiate a clear relationship between the 65-year steady reduction of the top tax rates and economic growth. Analysis of such data suggests that the reduction in the top tax rates had little association with saving, investment, or productivity growth." That right there is the reason that they are trying to hide this study, that they tried to bury it. And luckily the Senate Democrats actually got a hold of this and posted it up on their site. And actually I'm going to post it in the comments so anybody watching can read this study and see what we're talking about, because it's a very, very good study. And so this blows the Republican argument out of the water.
I mean, the reason it blows the Republican argument out of the water is because the Republicans they're not free market people. They're Keynesian. They're Keynesian. They believe in Keynesian economic theory, but they're what we call war Keynesians. Like, they think that's the best way to stimulate the economy is through, bombing other countries and building, like, all these weapons that they don't actually improve anybody's lives at all. But if you look at the early history of America, the most radical expansion of growth was between, the beginning of the country and, 1913, before we got the income tax and before we had the big world wars. And most of the growth happened in the North, which was free from slavery. So we had no income tax then. We had very little regulation, but we did have strong private property rights.
But we
And you
also
can't. It's really hard to compare that economic time and that time in history with what we're dealing with now, though, because you're dealing with so many different aspects of life and society that are completely different. Women didn't have any rights. Blacks were still enslaved. Hemp fields were prosperous and numerous, and you could pay your taxes with them, and you made paper out of them. It was just a completely different economic and social environment. It was just completely different altogether. So I have a hard time, when people try to compare that period with now, because so much is different. So much is radically different.
You also left out, of course, the most important factor within that time period that you had mentioned. You said that they didn't have an income tax, and that's true. That's very true. But you also you addressed that they had no regulation. That's also true. And they also, as a result of all of that, they had the era of the robber barons. It was the worst time to be a worker in those times, because the company, the factories, they could do anything that they wanted to do. There were no worker protections. There was abject poverty. So really, you can't really look at that time in history as a model for what the nation should be.
I mean, I'm going to use a modern example in a minute, but I just want to say that, everybody talks about Henry Ford paying his workers. That's $5 a day. That's in that time period. Like, it's before we had an income tax, before we had real, regulations of the economy, before unions, that Henry Ford paid his workers $5 a day, which at the time was a fifth of an ounce of gold, and that adds up to about $2,100 a week in today's dollars if you factor in the price of gold today. So $2,100 a week for a blue-collar worker, with no taxes is an excellent wage. And I know that's one example, but
that's one of the only examples, though. That's the point. He was the anomaly. He wasn't the norm.
Well, he caused General Motors and all the other auto companies to raise their wages because they had to keep their employees from going to Ford.
Right. That was nice of him to do, but there was nothing obligating him to do it.
There is no obligation. You pay people what they're worth. But I want to move to a modern example, and that's Hong Kong. Over the last 50 years, Hong Kong has had tremendous economic growth, and what they had was a system similar to ours. They had British common law because they were a British colony, but everything else the British colonists just left them to deal with on their own. So once you have that base of private property protection and all the stuff that we know works, economic growth just happened.
Yeah. Actually, this is another kind of good segue onto another part of the study, actually. And this is another one of the most important parts of this study, is that, quote, the top tax rate reductions appear to be associated with the increasing concentration of income at the top of the income distribution. Once again, I point to your example of between 1913 and the 1800s, you said, or founding of the country that you said, and there was concentration of wealth, but it was at the top. And we're seeing kind of the same thing today. In fact, another part of the study says, quote, the evidence does not suggest necessarily a relationship between tax policy with regard to the top tax rates and the size of the economic pie, but there may be a relationship to how the economic pie is sliced. So, in essence, this study shows that this, not sure how to put it, the fact that the money went from all this economic growth, it went to a very small amount of people, and I just don't see any reason why we should go back to that. But that's where we're heading.
Well, I mean, that's where we are.
Yeah.
We're not going back to that. But I would actually like to punt this over to Brian, since he hasn't said anything.
Hey, thanks for remembering me. Oh, hey, I'll tell you, that article, that study, all I can say is the people selling this stuff, they know it's bullshit. It is bullshit. They know it's bullshit. and they're just passing off whatever they can to whomever they can. Just some recent examples, using some recent examples. You look back to Reagan economics, the great and almighty Republican Ronald Reagan. Post-World War II, Reagan era had the highest corporate and personal tax rates around. And what happened with the country? It prospered. Huge economic growth. A lot of economic growth happened that way. To what you were saying, Sean, in Canada, when we had our huge deficit problem, and even as we encounter problems going forward, one of the things that Canada realizes is that, yeah, we have huge taxes and tax additions, tax breaks. Those aren't really what govern things. It's not, looking at the Americans also, it's not the corporations that drive the economy. It's the workers, it's the consumers. And the more money you can put into the workers' hands, more money you can put into the consumers' hands, the better your economy is going to be. So giving these tax breaks, or not, not tax breaks, but by not increasing the taxes, not having the top percentage pay their fair share, has nothing to do with stimulating or growing the economy. It has to do with lining their pockets, with making those corporations and those people at the top richer than they already are. And that's all there is to it.
I mean, look, the point I'm trying to make is that I agree with the study in a sense that tax rates they're not the biggest indicator. They're probably not even a good indicator. Like, that's the conclusion of the study, that they are not an indicator, especially the top tax rate. But my point is, there's a lot of factors that tilt money toward the top. It's the way, every dollar that the government spends goes to somebody, and it's usually somebody well connected. There's the loopholes in the tax code. This just what actually drives economic growth, in my opinion, and I think it's been proven, is simple rules, enforcement of private property rights, and enforcement of contracts. We have the exact opposite of that. We have complicated rules. We have if you're a big bank and you fail, congratulations, you don't fail because you're too big to fail for some reason. We have a way too complicated system for economic growth, and to me, that's why the wages are stagnant for the lower income.
And I'm gonna add a couple of facts here to talk more about income distribution. Basically the study continued, and that it said average real income increased by 395% for the top 0.1%. And average real income increased by 692% for the top 0.01%. And average real income for the balance of the top 1% in the income distribution, basically everybody but the 0.1%, increased by 165%. And that's since 1945, like I said. So that's
but no
huge.
Disparities there. No disparities there. That's just that's capitalism.
Well, I mean, there some income inequality is a part of capitalism and a part of freedom. I would say that if you live in a merit society, some people are going to earn more than other people.
Of course, we have no problem with that.
It's like everybody focuses on the gap, but they don't usually focus on the individuals. A lot of the individuals in the lower part end up making it not to the top. Obviously not all of them make it to the top, but they make it further up the line, and that's, to me, is what we should be worried about. We're falling behind in upward mobility.
Yeah,
we're falling behind in that. I'm more worried about that than general income inequality.
Well, that's kind of like, that kind of goes hand in hand, I think.
The disparity between the income brackets is disturbingly, the gap between the richest and the poorest is unacceptable. It's unacceptable because it's absolutely unnecessary and it can be prevented. And it's only through greed that this is allowed to continue. How many of those people in the richest 1% earned that much money. They didn't earn it. The people that work for them earned a lot of it for them. The people that they have connections with earned a lot of it for them. They probably have a lot of family connections if they didn't directly inherit. These people did not necessarily earn where they are. And they have
stock market. Don't forget the stock market.
And the stock market, they have a responsibility to give back to their community and their society. They do not need the mountains and mountains and mountains of cash that no person in the world could possibly spend that much money, and yet they keep grasping for more, and they need more, and we need more tax cuts, and we need more tax loopholes, and we need more. We need to hide our funds overseas so we don't have to pay any taxes. They're just greedy. They're greedy, and that's why that there's such a gap in our society from the rich and the poor. It's a concerted effort on their part to create a system that's so convoluted that it only works to their benefit. Go ahead.
And this is why I had mentioned, I interrupted with the stock market there, because a lot of the right wing will now tell you that, oh, look, the markets are bouncing back. Look how the markets are bouncing back. But that's a false argument, because how many of the 99% are invested in the stock market to a point where they're going to get rich off that? No, it's the top 1% who make about 90% of the money from the stock market. The 99% of us are left with the other 5-10% of the money out of the stock market.
The point that I was trying to make about wealth inequality is that, yes, the gap between the rich and the poor is bigger than it's ever been, or maybe bigger than it's ever been. I'm not sure, but it's pretty goddamn big.
It's bigger than it's ever been.
All right, thank you. But so a lot of people, we're falling behind in upward mobility, but we're still 10th in the world in upward mobility in the United States. So a lot of people who start out in the bottom, like 15%, can make it to the top 20%. They won't make it to the top 1% all the time, and probably very rarely. But me as a young kid, if I go out and work, I'm going to earn minimum wage. That's going to put me in the bottom. But I'm going to school and I'm trying to get my education, and eventually I'll move up in the bracket. So what I'm saying is you should focus more on the individuals and their lifespan, and studies that follow individuals who start at the bottom. They usually end up in a higher bracket. So it's not always it's not like everybody at the bottom stays there. It's new people that are at the bottom.
And it takes a lot of, I think, in order to get upward mobility, I think it takes investment, either investment by the individual or investment, say, by both the state and the individual. And I'm talking kind of about the student loan program. Now, I know you completely disagree with me on the student loan program, and that's cool. But that's a part of that investment. And I really think education in general is an investment that I think we need to do more of, increase the quality of. And I think a lot of those, some of that income disparity, some of that income that continues to flow to the top, I don't think it should flow to the top anymore. I think it should be redirected to investment projects to get people to be able to move up in our society.
I agree, and I think we should definitely invest in the public school system, because if you want kids to go to college at all, which everyone should have the opportunity to go to college, they need to be educated enough at the elementary and the middle school and the high school levels, because there are a lot of people that graduate high school who can't even put a proper grammatical sentence together. They don't understand the structure of an essay. These basic things that they just slide through in the public school system, because they're basically neglected. And the school doesn't want to seem like a total failure, so they just, the teachers are like, whatever, pass them. And then you end up with people with these subpar educations who have no self-confidence and certainly no confidence to go into college, and if they do, they often drop out. It's a disaster.
Well, and the jobs that are left for them, of course, have disappeared. and have really been replaced. Because somebody who, didn't graduate high school or just graduated high school barely, they could still go out and get a manufacturing job because that was rather low skill. Low skill, but not bad pay. You could still, be able to raise a family. You'd be lower middle class. You wouldn't be in poverty, at least, the way that you are now, with those same jobs, because they've came back, but with lower wages this time and less benefits. But that's a different show. But a lot of those higher paying, higher wage jobs that you could get by with a high school diploma have been replaced by, like I said, service jobs. McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell. And that's pretty much what the future for people who don't get a good education have to look forward to.
Walmart.
And Walmart. One
First
of the biggest welfare, actually the biggest welfare queen in America.
And the whole thing right there's that recently in the news now, there's the stuff out showing how Costco is beating out Walmart in all respects, because from a simple fact that they actually pay their employees a living wage or a decent living wage, and give them proper benefits without big hoo-has, big brouhahas about it. They just do it, and it's beneficial to them, it's beneficial to their employees, and it's beneficial to the communities that they're operating in.
That's actually a great point. Costco's investing in their employees. They don't need government intervention to do so, and they're hoping to, get more productivity by making their employees happier, as opposed to Walmart.
And it's working for them at the moment.
It is, as opposed to Walmart, who, uses government benefits to not pay their employees well.
And the sad fact is that, I know where you're going with this argument, and it's great that the fact that Costco is doing it on its own. But you realize that the Waltons and most of these CEOs that are raking in tons of cash, they don't want to give out more. So it takes something like the government to say, look, we're going to have to instill a minimum wage on you so that you can pay your workers better, because obviously you're not going to do it on your own.
Well,
you don't see that it's better for you.
Here's one of those things that has always gotten me a little funny here, and that's that a lot of these companies we're talking about right now, we're talking about Walmart, these big corporations, big consumer corporations, Walmart, Target, all the fast food franchise, Taco Bell, KFC, whatever you want, Subway. These are all American companies, and these are all the top leaders in these corporations that tell you how bad taxes will be for them, how bad taxes will, by taxing them, what a terrible thing it'll be for the country and their employees. Yet these companies, these corporations all operate here in Canada, as well as other countries around the world, not just Canada, but they're subject to the same tax laws that all other Canadian corporations are here. They pay the same tax, or they pay their fair share, they pay their tax rate. They don't get all these loopholes. And yet through all of this, they have to pay their workers what are considered standard wages or living wages. They have to provide health cares. They have to do all these things up here. It's all regulated, and they do it without complaining. And guess what? They still make lots of profit up here. That's why they're still here. That's why they don't pack up and leave, because it's worth it for them. So why can't they institute and apply the same rules to where they actually live, to how they operate in countries that they're visitors in?
All right.
Well, Walmart actually does pay, compared to other corporations, they actually do pay a higher effective tax rate, and that's just because they can't, they can't hide all their jobs overseas because they're service sector jobs. So they do pay a little more than your average company like General Electric. You know what I mean? So I mean they do pay some in taxes.
Yeah, but General Electric operates in Canada too.
I know. I get what you're saying, but.
All right, guys. On that note, we're going to have to wrap up the segment. Can we get some final thoughts? Rhea, let's start with you.
I'm going to keep it short this time because I think we're running a little long here. Stop listening to Republicans about taxes. They're full of shit. Tax the rich.
Well said. Sean.
I'll keep it short too. The Republican Party is full of shit, but it's a more complicated problem that should focus first on spending instead of taxes.
All right, Ryan.
Basically, short and sweet. I think that everybody should pay their fair share. I'm not saying anyone should pay more than others. I'm just saying that people should pay their fair share.
And for my final thought, I'm going to say just I'm going to go in a different direction and just say how, how dare they try to bury the truth. They don't like this. They don't like this study because it contradicts their ideology. And that's where their party is right now. It's ideology over facts. And really, I think that's going to be the eventual downfall of that party, is they need to start embracing the facts and let go of trickle-down, because it just hasn't worked.
It even makes it sound like they're pissing on you.
All right, so I want to thank our panelists for joining us today on this segment. Where can we find everybody? We'll start with you, Brian.
You can usually find me in my living room in most evenings. Other than that, you can find me on YouTube at Piratefish1.
All right, Rhea, where can we find you, girl?
You can always find me on Twitter at Lady Rhiannon824 or Facebook, facebook.com/LadyRhiannon824, and read my blog at LadyRhiannon824.blogspot.com. Oh, and visit my YouTube channel, The Lady Rhiannon.
All right, Sean, where can we find you, brother?
You can find me on youtube.com/IamSean90, twitter.com/IamSean90, and sometimes you just won't be able to find me because I'm bad.
Because you're a ninja.
You might be Batman.
All right, and I want to thank you guys for watching TYT Community. You can find us on, you can find some of our videos posted on TYT Nation, and you can also visit our channel, youtube.com/TYT Community. Like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week with another full episode. And stick around for the coming segment. We're going to talk about Steubenville.